Hey, Pastor Steve Waldron. I hope you're having an incredible day or night in Jesus. Thank you so much for being with us. Now, we want to give some characteristics of the best Bible manuscripts, those Bible manuscripts that are the most valuable. Now, if you're just kind of looking at biblical textual criticism from, maybe it's not something you do every day, you haven't taught college classes on it or something, you just kind of, let me read a couple books on this, 3 books on this. What makes sense is oldest is best. I mean, that just makes sense. I felt that way for many years till you really just dig down and see that's not necessarily true. There's so many variables that go into this. Now, I'll tell you, the guy who, in my opinion, has done the best I've ever read on sorting out where the best manuscripts are and how they're preserved is Wilbur Pickering. Wilbur Pickering, a longtime missionary to Brazil. And he's got a book. It's in its, last I checked, its 5th iteration, 5th edition. Started out in the 70s by Thomas Nelson, called The Identity of the New Testament Text. Now, he's had someone kind of abbreviate it, and it's extremely useful book. And it's called F35. And the reason it's called F35, that would be a series of manuscripts that Dr. Pickering has been going over for many years by the dozens, and I think in some cases the hundreds, and seeing their perfection. So somebody took care to copy these things correctly is the thing. So, okay, you might have something very old. Now, what happens is so often, first of all, the oldest biblical manuscripts that we have are really just scraps of papyri. Sometimes they're 2 verses or something. I've done a series on oldest papyri and where they come from. You may want to check that out. But you get into the 200s is when you start getting into multiple books and codices. Now, at the same time, you have some very ancient congruent writings that have been preserved. There was a lot lost, either deliberately or not deliberately, that people call the early church fathers. And they're going to quote. Many would say you could reproduce the entire New Testament from the first, 300 years after the New Testament era, just from their writings, the things that they quoted. So that's another valuable source, and Mormon and Dean Burgon have done the yeoman's work there, showing that so often that those are what we call received text or textus receptus writings. And then there's been a strange phenomenon that's happened that I notice when people talk to people with evolution as well, that even though that there's received text, textus receptus readings in the very oldest manuscripts, and going back to Pickering, he would make a very strong argument that Washingtonius is probably pre-200 AD, and the freer manuscript it's called, and it's going to have quite a bit of King James Bishop's Bible type readings in it, there. And also, your German, your Olivetan, your Diodate, and all of these type readings from the Reformation text, which they were very interested is where was Christianity outside the Roman Catholic Church. This is what they were looking at. And so where were Bibles at outside the Roman Catholic Church? And so they were using like the Teppel Codex from 1483, a German Bible from 1483, various other things. Wycliffe, long story on Wycliffe, because it's generally said the Vulgate started, 400 AD. That's not the whole story. I was so appreciative, even on Wikipedia the other day, that it mentioned that the Old Latin and the Vulgate kind of went parallel till the 1300s. And that's exactly what happened. The Vulgate, because you have to remember, they just didn't have travel, they didn't have electronics, they didn't have the printing press or anything. So it was very difficult for things to gain ascendancy, more so than it is in modern day, that you can have a narrative on 4 or 5 platforms or media companies or something. It's almost instantaneous. Well, this wasn't the case, 1800, 2000 years ago, and on and on. So the best manuscripts, okay, if you've got like the book of Ephesians, what manuscripts were found around Ephesus? If you've got the epistle to the Galatians, what manuscripts were found around Galatia? We're talking about New Testament. Now, Old Testament would be, well, somewhat similar actually, but Corinth, what manuscripts are found around the city of Corinth? And then when people will die for error, but a lot of people won't die for error. What manuscripts had the marks of the most care copying them? Because it's the days before the printing press. Because there's a whole host of manuscripts that have certain scribal diacritical marks there, like a line over it and stuff like this, that it's indicating delete this in your next copy. And so it's obvious this is coming from false doctrine practitioners that knew the power of one word, one letter, one phrase. And a lot of people say, well, why didn't they remove it from everything? Because it would be obvious. So the game was, they would play the long game, is remove it maybe in Acts here, then the next iteration remove it in 1 Corinthians, the next iteration remove it in Galatians, on and so forth. So it would be a subtle thing, as Satan is more subtle than all the beasts of the field, and not just all at once. So that's a question you get a lot, but that's the answer to the question. I'm thinking here too of the times they would do abbreviations, like for Jehovah or Yahweh, and they would do those same abbreviations for Jesus, showing they felt Jesus was God. That's another neat little thing of scribal tendencies. But so when you're looking at the best manuscripts, you're wanting manuscripts that have a provenance. Where did they come from? What were they being copied from? The care in copying, and not is the manuscript trying to be manipulated to convince of a Gnostic doctrine, some Ebionite doctrine, some other false doctrine from early church history. And that's the reason, when you get to the 9th century AD, 10th century AD, almost every manuscript, especially in Greek, is identical. When I say identical, I mean, there may be, the printing press hadn't been invented yet. So I've done videos on how they copied, and they're sitting on a stone thing and a stone table and copying in the cold with no electricity and all this kind of stuff with a feather scribe, pen and all this. It was not the best of conditions. So they're going to mess up occasionally with a letter here or a mark here or a diacritical mark here or something. But overall, they're identical. They're exactly alike, except for these just few little human mistakes, And they knew it was the Word of God, and they took great care in copying it. And so, and then the pure of the Christians, it's kind of a rule of history. The pure of the Christians, God gives them a pure Bible. Where were those people at as well? What Bibles were they using? So there's so much more in this. We could talk and probably for a very long time and discuss it. I wish you were here talking over a cup of coffee, even though I don't drink coffee much. So God bless you. Check out our other videos. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.